Oh, welcome to the History Project for the AAML. I'm Sherry Cassedy, and I'm pleased to be here today with Diana Richmond. We are both longtime AAML fellows, and we wanted to just have a conversation today, sharing with each other and with you about our family law practice and our participation in AAML and the chapters that continue to flow. So Diana, you're muted there.
Good morning, Sherry. From our prior conversations, I think you entered family law far more consciously than I did. What got you interested in family law in the first place?
Well, I think it's really an outgrowth of why I went to law school. So I was a human biology major in college, and then I went to law school with an interest in health policy, public policy, and particularly public policy as it impacted women. And then I was really fortunate after law school to get a fellowship in women law and public policy through the Revson Foundation. And I was placed on Capitol Hill after graduating from Georgetown in Washington, D.C. And I worked on Capitol Hill for the Congressional Caucus for Women's Issues in 1984 and 85. And the focus for my work as a lawyer was very much on economic issues. So I worked on child support enforcement, pension reform, military pensions, COBRA, continuing insurance for dependents, tax reform for head of households. And eventually we drafted the first Family Leave Act. But as I had graduated from law school and then done this great policy work, I really wanted to see how it operated in people's lives. And I had the occasion to talk with an older male attorney about that time. And he said, oh, all these young women lawyers, they're so fired up about women's rights. What women really need is a good divorce lawyer. And I thought, yeah, all these issues I'm working on the national level of policy are all about when women are divorced and widowed and their financial vulnerability. So that's what led me into family law. But of course, family law being the great equalizer, since we do work both sides of the street, I was just as likely to represent men as women, and found that the arguments, weren't one-sided in most cases. So it generally balanced out my kind of sympathies for women to find that, it was more across the board. But that's what took me into it.
What a lucky beginning.
And how about for you?
My own entry in law school, I got a job with Larry Stoddard and had the good fortune to have him encourage me to use in a pending appeal an issue I'd been working on in law school, which was eliminating the husband's management and control over community property. Now I realize that dates me. That was changed in 1973, the year I graduated and the year before I was working on this unsuccessful appeal. But I got to use the argument that it was unconstitutional. And that really raised my interest in family law. And what I didn't know until I had practiced family law for a while was how much we as family lawyers can contribute to someone's independence and autonomy. There has been a real culture shift in many dimensions over the 45 years or more that I practiced family law.
Yeah, and it sounds like that was a driving motivator for you in practicing family law?
Very definitely so. I didn't intend to go into family law, but once I started practicing it, I found it quite rewarding, immensely so.
Yeah, I began practicing family law at Brobeck, Flager and Harrison, so one of the large corporate law firms. And I was the only family law associate in the firm. But I was sitting in the library reading these, really interesting data separation cases and all these juicy details while my cohort around me was reading about securities and taxes, et cetera. So I felt really blessed by that. But I also just loved the dynamic social policy climate around family law. You know, the law was constantly changing, the social environment around families and relationships was changing. And then as we've talked about, the sort of financial overlay or the community property overlay, I should say, on these really interesting and dynamic financial professions, careers, you know, watching Silicon Valley develop and getting involved in how do you deal with founder stock or how do you deal with venture capital, you know, the different professions, and then applying the community property laws to these really interesting different contexts.
I couldn't agree with you more. And when I think about how much child custody has changed over the term of my practice, for fathers to get physical custody of children was difficult when I started to practice. The notion of equal timeshare was really off on the margins. Not to mention custody for gay and lesbian parents, which became a forefront issue and changed dramatically.
Right. I mean, it has changed and it continues to change.
To do so.
Right. The other part of practicing family law, which I think you're speaking about a little bit in terms of kind of the empowerment, education and empowerment of clients as they're moving through this big life transition, is just the human element. You know, the emotional vulnerability of our clients and how we can really see them through this difficult time.
I felt like an unlicensed psychologist through the whole time of my practice. And the human element was among the most rewarding. Sometimes the task of trying to convince a client to do what we knew she or he ought to do in order to gain ground was the most difficult part of it.
Right. I mean, it's really where the term that's used for attorneys of counselor comes in. It's advising. And so what about AAML? How did you become involved in AAML?
You know, it was an interesting privilege. Larry Stoddard, my first employer, was one of the founders of the Northern California chapter. So I learned about his efforts while I was still in law school, and then obviously wasn't eligible to become a fellow until I think 10 years after I was in practice, but became a fellow right away, and consider it to have been a privilege throughout my time of practicing. Partly for the getting to know most of the people I most wanted to learn from or emulate in a small group setting, partly for the congeniality, the values. It's been very influential for me. And then it's offered me an opportunity to work on some important issues over time, mostly with national.
Well, you know, we were talking about this a little bit. There was kind of a cohort of male family lawyers here in the Bay Area, Larry Stoddard being one, Max Gutierrez, one of the attorneys that I worked with, being another, George Norton, my second employer and mentor, Meryl Steinberg and Harry Hansen and Norton Blacker and many others. And then Susie Thorne and Ann Diamond being kind of the women of that generation that helped form us. So my first AAML meeting that I attended as a brand new lawyer, brand new family lawyer, I went with my partner, Max Gutierrez, to an evening meeting in San Francisco. And we had kind of a difficult case with another senior male attorney who had a young female associate, my counterpart. And at that AAML meeting, that young woman served you with a subpoena in another case.
A good example of what not to do in a collegial group.
Yeah.
You reminded me of it this morning. I had fortunately forgotten all those many years ago, but it did remind me. It's the kind of thing I'm contradicting myself now, but for the years I was in practice, I never forgot it. And it leaves an imprint on what it is like to deal with that particular person. There are people who leave bad imprints and people who leave good imprints. And that level of humanity or not is a big feature of learning to become an effective family law attorney.
Right. And oftentimes my mentor attorneys would tell me, that my profession, my reputation, my career was going to outlast any particular case. That sort of the kerfuffles that come up in a case are of the moment, but these relationships that we have with the other attorneys, with the other professionals, with the judges, that really makes our career. And sometimes in the moment, it's hard to remember that. But so with this generation that I think formed your cohort, particularly, and you're about 10 years ahead of me, then there's your cohort who I consider largely female. There's Diana Richmond, Pam Pearson, Dee Samuels, Peggy Bennington and Madeline Simborg, Lee Jordan, who was a fabulous litigator, very skilled litigator, who decided to devote herself entirely to mediation. But these are the women who were really powerful role models for me, and then opponents, and then close colleagues and dear friends.
So many of us were initially the associates of some of those male leaders in the practice. I remember spending 4 years at Sternstadter, Rosenberg, and O'Brien before deciding I needed to go out on my own and become my own person, and how I was going to practice with the values I had developed. And I remember going through a list of all the family law attorneys in the Bay Area and who I was willing to work for and not, and coming to the unfortunate conclusion that I needed to go out on my own, which I've never regretted.
Yeah, and you've spent a lot of your career practicing on your own.
I did.
And I was always in a firm because I started with Max Gutierrez at Brobeck and worked there for a couple of years before I joined George Norton, where I then became a partner, and continued with the firm until I guess about 15 years ago, as I shifted my practice solely to neutral work. Then I've been on my own during that time. But there was also in your cohort of so many fabulous women, powerful women attorneys, there was a standout male who I remember when I attended the AAML symposium in San Francisco at Golden Gate University in the big auditorium, and Rick Chamberlain presided. He was the MC of the symposium that year in his tux and tails and all of his aplomb. But he was just such a picture of the professionalism, but also the personality and the camaraderie that I certainly wanted to emulate in my family law practice.
He became my law partner after a bit, and I was very pleased to have worked with him until he died. He was at the forefront of changing the minds and souls of what I would call a group of homophobic male leaders at National. He went there and he simply charmed people. People liked him. They loved his sense of humor. He was very knowledgeable, extremely cordial, and just opened the way for many people to follow him. Also, the Northern California chapter at that span of time was looked at as kind of out there and weird. And I think he helped to transform the vision of us as actually being responsible family lawyers.
Well, I think we have continued to be somewhat of, if not an outlier, maybe a leader in certain ways with the mentorship program, with our focus on mediation and alternate dispute resolution. Certainly private judging is pretty unique.
Started in California. In all the ways we are outliers, I'm proud to be a Northern Californian. And perhaps the project, one of the projects I most appreciated the opportunity to work on was the Bounds of Advocacy. That was a national project to revise the standards of conduct for family law attorneys. And I was very much pushing for pushing aside zealous advocacy as being the model and replacing it with problem solving. We made some headway on that score, and it's a piece of work I continue to be proud of.
Well, and you also were very involved in the appellate work with AAML, right? In terms of amici.
Yes, I loved working on the various amicus projects, and most of them were with regard to marriage equality and recognition of custody rights for same-sex parents.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved every one of those projects.
Well, we could probably have a very long conversation about the Supreme Court and where some of these
We'll not do that today.
We won't go there. We'll just footnote that. For my part with AAML, the couple of things that I worked on that gave me a lot of satisfaction. One is starting the trial practicum program, which was a brainchild of Anne-Marie Rossi and Jamie Throgmorton and myself, which we did a couple of years on our own. And then we went to AAML and said, you know, would you like to take on this project? And it was really great fun to do the real life trial advocacy work with newer attorneys and take them all the way through the mock trial experience. And now that's become a
standard with, it's an incredibly useful training tool that wasn't there when I began to practice.
Right. And it's not
so
that we do a lot of,
is now regarded as something they absolutely need to do.
Right. Because it wasn't that we're encouraging litigation necessarily, but we weren't doing a lot of litigation. So then all of a sudden, when you had a trial, you were kind of caught up short. So really providing those basic skills and experience was the idea. And then the mentorship program has also been a really good project to be involved in, and just both developing the collegiality amongst the AAML group and then sharing that with younger attorneys and cultivating that kind of professional collegiality within the
You've been a real cultural leader within AAML on that score and many others.
But so let's talk a little bit about the professional community of AAML. I mean, I think that for both of us, that's been a really high value.
For me, it's been a group of attorneys I have I have admired, learned to trust, debate issues with, and many of them have become close, long-term personal friends of mine that might not otherwise have happened. And our monthly meetings were a forum for our getting to know one another better.
Mm-hmm.
I value that immensely.
Mm-hmm. And then I was always just really excited to be able to sit with the caliber of attorneys and talk through some of the controversial issues at the time, whether it was a legal, nicety that we were going back and forth on, goodwill or marital standard of living or whatever it was, but to really be thinking about it together and able to talk about it, or the larger social issues and social movement that was happening that always impacts family law. But I agree, the relationships over time and that professional but very collegial relationship has been an ongoing blessing.
It was as valuable to have discussions with people with whom we disagreed as it was with those we automatically agreed with. That it was an education that I think went around the circle for us all.
Any other AAML moments that you want to share with us?
Well, we were talking about values, and one of the more spontaneous things I ever did that current lawyers probably don't remember, but we had a prominent national AAML fellow come out to address the annual symposium in San Francisco. And this man started referring to maximizing the billable hours in terms that were really revoltingly sexist. And a number of the women in the audience were really offended. And I walked up to the stage and took the microphone and said to the assembled audience, fellows and non-fellows, that this speaker, although I appreciated him coming out from Chicago, did not represent the values of our chapter or how we hope to practice family law. I've never been sorry I did that.
Sometimes, yeah, the speaking out, standing up and speaking out is really important. And it shifts the culture. It can wake people up, yeah. So
what are some of your favorite moments within AAML?
I mentioned a couple, but yeah, I think it's, whenever I attend the symposium, which we just had recently, outdoors in Napa again, and being there and seeing people, realizing how many new people there are in the gathered assembly. But yeah, just sharing our practice. I think that the professionalism and I think a deep appreciation for this area of law and for the work that we do. Yeah.
I know that I have retired within the last few years, 4 years, something like that, and that you have changed the nature of your practice. What's lighting you up these days?
So I've been doing since 2004 only neutral work as a mediator, private judge. In the last few years, I've limited that to private judging, and now I'm sort of phasing out of that work as well. So I could see myself being fully retired from legal work by the end of the year, this year, 2022. I'm really enjoying teaching. I'm doing some teaching in spiritual work and yoga and other types of spiritual work. I just published my first book, Marriage Unveiled, which is part memoir and part guidance for marriage, that I hope, it's for me kind of a culmination of the work that I've done, to put it forward to couples who are struggling or exploring, to hopefully share with them some hard-earned wisdom. So that's been an exciting event of getting it published. And now, of course, the ongoing promotion and conversations around it. So yeah, I look forward to more kind of writing and speaking and teaching.
It's a wonderful book reaffirming marriage values and challenging couples to think and discuss some of the issues in marriage. It was
right. And thankfully I can say marriage and have it be an inclusive term at this point. So I hope that it, and I know from talking with some of my gay and lesbian friends that it does resonate across the spectrum. The issues aren't unique to a particular couple, and but each couple is unique. So there's that combination of resonance and differentiation. So yeah, I hope it will be a helpful contribution to couples across the spectrum.
I wish you much success with it. It's an inspiring book to read.
Well, thank you. And tell us about your next chapter. What have you been doing these last few years, and what does the future hold?
Well, I've now published my third novel, which I'm very pleased to have done this year. It's called Resilience, about many different people surviving the first year or two of COVID and the isolation and the political upheaval that occurred during the same time. And I found myself working on a new fictional project now. Writing was something I always wanted to do, and writing appeals in briefs has helped focus me in a way that is an enhancement.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm grateful for all that experience.
Yeah, well, and I've read all of your novels so far, and they're really, you managed to find kind of these sort of personal social issues that you then delve into with your characters and create this landscape of a community, struggling with the changing values and understandings.
That's what I'm working now as well. I realize one of the most rewarding things to me in writing something is working through difficult issues, difficult human, psychological, social issues, and how people grapple with them and grope through solving them.
That sounds like family law.
It does indeed. So it's a very synergistic practice.
Well, I think that the dynamism in family law will continue. And I think that taking our work to heart as caring professionals, working within this very tender milieu of the psychological, emotional, financial, legal with our clients, and being supported by an organization like AAML with the collegiality and support for ourselves and for each other, really enables us to practice with a lot of care and consciousness.
Well, I don't want to give all the credit to your mentoring, but I feel very confident and hopeful about the new generations of family law attorneys out there who are carrying the work forward. Mm-hmm. And I think you have contributed significantly to that.
As have you, my friend.
I hope so.
Well, thanks for joining me for this conversation. And I hope that all of you listening find it interesting and valuable. And we wish you all the best in your continuing years of practice.
Thank you, Sherry.
Thanks.